What? She shook her head, her throat painfully tight. I can't just sit here and wait for it to happen, she said. I want to get it over with. He grabbed her hand and shoved it hard against his groin. That's what's the matter with me. At her, his palms grinding up against her nipples, the burning between her legs. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of our book club series. I'm so excited because it's been way too long since I've done this. That's almost embarrassing that I was that excited about this, but I don't care. Anyways, this is my pathetic excuse for a Halloween costume today. I just didn't feel like it. Sorry. But yeah, so we're gonna pick back up where we left off on The Pact. If you don't know me and you have no idea what I'm talking about, my name is Brooke, and on my channel, I do a lot of things on my channel, but this one in particular is a book club series where I read the book out loud and then I do a video where we discuss everything that goes on, like all the drama, all the juicy, hot goss drama that happens, which is actually just now picking up in this book. We are literally halfway through. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I need to say before I get started. If you're following along, like if you got the book, it's page 171, and it says then May 1996. But yeah, if you want to follow along with the book club series, I have a playlist on my channel here of every video that I've made and all of the discussions, like right along in order. So you can literally just watch them all, like you can binge watch them all and listen to the entire book. Well, when I'm done with it, you can listen halfway through now. I think I might end up doing this for Vlogmas too, because I really need to finish this book. And if I do Vlogmas, that's going to force me to do it every day. So I really miss doing this. Like, it's so fun. Like, I don't know. I love like bringing the characters to life and then talking about them, like, you know what I mean? Like, they're like real people, and like talking about all the drama that goes down. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It's fun. Okay. I'm going to read the ending of the last page that we left off on, because I don't remember at all, like, where we left off. So I'm going to read the ending, this page, and then we'll discuss a little bit, and then I'll pick back up. That way we can kind of all like be on the same page. Is that air conditioner really loud? I didn't think about that. I hope you guys can hear me. I definitely don't want to turn it off. What if I just like yell? I'm naturally a loud person anyways. That's not comforting. Nobody wants to listen to that. I'll just try to speak directly into the camera. I'll just have to be really close. We're just going to get to know each other very well today. So get up close and personal. How the hell do you know about M? Chris asked. That's the name you say at night. Steve stood up, his back against the metal bars of the cell. I just wondered if you see her like I see him. Chris thought about Jordan McAfee's warning about rats that the cops put in your cell just to fill out your confessions. If he questioned, he would be questioned. And if he questioned, he would be questioned. And he was not sure that he wanted that sort of connection forged. But all the same, Chris heard himself whisper, "What happened?" "I was home alone with him," Steve whispered. "Me and Liza had a big fight, and she had stormed off to the hairdresser's where she worked. She wasn't even speaking to me by the time she left, but she told me to take care of the baby. I got pissed off, and I started drinking whatever was left in the fridge. And then he woke up, crying so loud that it was giving me a headache." Steve turned around, his forehead pressed against the bars. "I tried to give him his bottle, and I changed his diaper, but he kept screaming. So I carried him, with him yelling all the time in my ear, and my head about to split. Before I know it, I'm shaking him, telling him to just stop crying already." He took a deep, wet breath. "And then I was shaking him, trying to get him to start crying. Steve spun around, his eyes gray and glazed. Do you know what it's like to hold this little person in your arms afterward, and to know that you were supposed to be the one to protect it? Chris swallowed past the constriction of his throat. What was his name? Benjamin, Steve said. Benjamin Tyler Vernon. M, Chris answered softly. A perfectly appropriate response. Emily Gold. Okay, so what this is referring to is Chris is in jail now because he's being tried for the murder of Emily, his girlfriend. Big refresher. I'm not going to go into all this. Obviously, if you want to know all the deets, then play the playlist and follow along with the book club series. But yeah, so basically this is Chris talking to his cellmate, and they're like talking about the people that they quote unquote killed, even though Chris technically hasn't been convicted yet. But so I don't know what, like, if that means that he's admitting something, I don't know. But yeah, that's the guy that he's in his cell with, and was talking about his baby. Whew. That's intense. So now we're going to move on. It says then May 1996, and I'm going to try to be really close to the camera because I just don't want you guys, I don't want the air conditioner to block the story. His breath is so close I can taste him. His hands come to my waist, then slide up and pinch at me. I want to tell him it hurts, but I can't speak. I want to tell him I don't like this anymore. He pushes me back, and then his hand is down there, and I start to scream. The scream of the alarm clock made Emily bolt upright in her bed. So Emily's back alive now, or we're in the past. The sheets were tangled around her feet. She had sweated through her nightgown. Swinging her legs over the edge, she stretched. She walked to the bathroom and turned on the shower, waiting until steam clouded about her head before stepping into the stall. As she passed the mirror, she turned away. There was something about seeing herself naked that didn't seem quite right. She leaned back her head and let the water soothe her scalp. Then she picked up the soap and scrubbed at her skin until some spots were bleeding. But she still could not make herself feel clean. For once, history was interesting. Gross, but completely riveting. Mr. Waterstone had taken a break from the dry unit on taxation without representation and was detailing life in colonial America. They'd spent the past week learning the going prices for a bolt of calico, a crop of cotton, a healthy slave. Today, they were studying the Indians. Oops, Native Americans. The whole point of this diversion from the standard textbook was to give students an appreciation for what the life of a colonist was like, which included not only interference from the English crown, but also studious lack of contact with the natives. Emily's eyes were glued to the screen at the front of the class. As far as she could see, not even the biggest skanks in the class, total druggies, were passing notes now. Everyone was watching the remarkable reenacted footage of a Mohawk warrior cutting open the chest of a captured French-Canadian Jesuit priest and eating his heart before his eyes. Just want to make sure that's what it said. That's what it says. And eating his heart before his eyes. Okay. There was a thump in the rear of the class, and Emily tore her eyes away long enough to notice Adrian Whaley, a cheerleader, sprawled in a dead faint on the floor. "Oh shit," Mr. Waterstone said under his breath, but a curse all the same. He stopped the movie, flipped on the lights, and dispatched a student to run down to the nurse's office. Mr. Waterstone himself crouched over Adrian, rubbing her hand, and Em wondered if that wasn't Adrian's intention to begin with. Young Mr. Waterstone, with his shoulder-length jet hair and bright green eyes, was the most attractive male teacher in school. The bell rang just as the nurse waddled into the classroom with a bottle of ammonia that Adrian, now awake, didn't need. Emily gathered up her books and headed for the classroom door, where Chris was already waiting. Her hand slid neatly into his as they began moving in tandem. "How's Waterstone's class?" he asked. Chris had history 7th period. Emily squeezed closer to him as a crowd passed by, and then stayed at his side. "Oh," she said, "you'll like it." Next section. She liked kissing, In fact, if she could have gone back to just that, she would have. She liked opening her mouth against Chris's and having him fill it with his tongue, as if he was slipping her secrets. She liked feeling his moan roll. She liked feeling his moan roll, candy round and warm, into her mouth. This sentence is getting me. I'm just like, huh? Okay, let me try this again. She liked feeling his moan roll, candy round and warm, into her own mouth. She especially liked the way his big hands cradled her head, as if he could hold her thoughts together even when they started running off in directions she didn't want to explore. But lately, it seemed like they kissed less and spent more time fighting over where Chris's hands should stay. They were in the back of the Jeep now. How many times had Emily wondered if Chris had picked this car? How many times had Emily wondered if Chris had picked this car because of the way the seats folded down, with the windows all steamed up? On one, Emily had drawn a heart with their initials. She watched now as Chris's back rubbed against it, erasing it. "I want you so bad, Em," Chris whispered against her neck, and she nodded. She wanted Chris too, just not quite in the same way. In the abstract, the idea of making love with Chris was intriguing. Why wouldn't she, when she loved him more than anyone else in the world? It was just that the actual physical part of it. Just want to make sure I was actually filming, because I've done this before and didn't start filming, so. Okay, hold on. It was just that the actual physical part of it, the way that he touched her body, made her feel sick. She was afraid that by the time she got up the nerve to have sex, she'd be too busy throwing up to actually finish what she'd started. The problem was that she'd look down at Chris's hand on her breast, and she'd picture that same hand, albeit smaller, stealing a half-dozen cookies from a fresh-baked bunch before Chris's mom could see. Or she'd imagine the long fingers crossed in a game of scissors, paper, stone, while they sat side by side in the back seat on the way to some family vacation. Sometimes she felt like she was rolling around in the back of the Jeep with this incredibly gorgeous, sexy guy, and sometimes she felt like she was wrestling with her own brother. Try as she might, she couldn't untangle one from the other. She gently pushed on Chris's seat, trying to get him to sit up. When he lifted his head with a frown on his face, she smiled at him. His lips were still shiny and wet, and she felt a cooling ring around her nipple. She twisted her fingers with his. "Do you feel, close to me?" Chris's eyes burned. "God, yeah." Emily faltered. "I don't mean it like that," she corrected. "I guess, it's just that you know me better than my own brother." "You don't have a brother." "I know," Emily said, "but if I did, you'd be it." Chris grinned wickedly. "Well, let's all thank God I'm not," he said, bending his head again. She tugged at his hair. "Do you ever think about me like that?" she asked, shyly. "Like a sister?" "Not right now," he said in a strangled voice, and he touched his lips to hers. "I can promise you that I never," he kissed her again, "ever and again, have wanted to do this with Kate." He rolled away of his own volition, and the thick ridge beneath his jeans going soft. "God," he said, shuddering, "now you've got me all freaked out." Emily placed a hand on his chest. She loved his chest, with its light dusting of hair and long muscles. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." She moved into Chris's arms and felt them close around her. "Let's not talk," she suggested, and buried her face in the heat of his skin. Next section. His breath falls into my mouth, the only air I have. His hands start at my ankles and slide up my shins, pulling them apart like a vice. And I know what is coming as his fingers stab into me. He won't let me close my legs. He won't let me curl away. There is blood on his hand. He pushes against my shoulders and draws a red line down the middle of my chest. It cracks open and I feel him reaching deep inside me, tight and uncomfortable. Then something snakes out like jelly, and when I lift my eyes, I see Chris's teeth sinking into my heart. That's quite a dream. I didn't realize I was like this. Sorry. Damn, okay. That was her dream, I think. I don't know. No, Emily tugged at the collar of Chris's shirt. No, she repeated, and when his hands held her tighter, she pinched his neck. No, she yelled, rolling him off her with an unholy shove. I said no, she panted. Chris swallowed hard, his erection pink over the edge of his unzipped jeans. I didn't think you meant it, said every fucking male ever. Excuse me. Sidebar. I didn't think you meant it, he said. Jesus, Chris, she said. She rubbed her arms, covered with goosebumps, and turned away. The problem was, in a Jeep, there was not all that far to go. She waited for his hands to close over her shoulders, like they always did once they came to this point. It was like a play, coming to the same end of the act every night. The curtain would come down, and they'd do it all over again tomorrow. But Emily didn't feel Chris coming toward her this time. She heard the rasp of his zipper as he dressed himself, the creak of the Jeep's flatbed as he came to his knees, maneuvering around her. Move, he ordered tersely, and when she did, he snapped the rear seat back up into place. It was not until the overhead light went on as Chris opened the front door to slide into the driver's seat that Emily realized he meant to leave. Scrambling over the steering console, she managed to lock herself into her seatbelt as Chris roared out of the empty parking lot. He was driving fast and frenzied, very unlike Chris's natural caution. When he took a turn in the road on two wheels, Emily put her hand on his arm. What's the matter with you? He stared at her, his face so tight in the glare of the streetlights that for a moment Em did not recognize him at all. What's the matter with me? He parroted. What's the matter with me? Without warning, he swung the car down a dead-end street off to the right and slammed the stick shift into park. You want to know what's the matter with me, Em? He grabbed her hand and shoved it hard against his groin. That's what's the matter with me. He released her wrist, letting her hand crawl beneath her thigh in hiding. It's the only thing I can think of, the only thing that keeps me going. And night after night, you say no, and I'm supposed to sit back and deal with it in my own way. But the thing is, I can't deal with it. Not anymore. Emily's face reddened, and she stared at her lap. Hearing Chris sigh after a moment, he rubbed his hand through his hair, making it stand on end. Do you have any idea, he said, his voice soft, any idea at all how much I want you? She bit her lip. Wanting isn't the same as loving. He laughed, startled. Are you joking? I've loved you for, well, Christ, for my whole life. It's the wanting part that's new to me. He stroked Emily's temple with his thumb. Wanting isn't the same thing as loving, he agreed. But they might as well be, at least for me. Why? Emily managed. Chris smiled at her, melting her strongest defenses. Because wanting you, Em, he said, has only made me love you that much more. I wonder if these are like diary entries or like if they're dreams, because they keep having these like. I'll read it and you'll know what I'm talking about. Everything was sharper. She could smell his black breath, feel the coarse hairs on the back of his hand, see her own face staring back at her. She was wearing something with elastic at the waist. It snapped back against her hips. There were the familiar sensations of his fingernails scratching at her, his palms grinding up against her nipples, the burning between her legs. But this time there was more. The droning whir of, what? Bees? The tang of disinfectant, and the unmistakable scent of a kitchen, of something being fried in grease. Like, it keeps having like these little sidebars that's like, to me it sounds like a dream. It sounds like a dream. So, I don't know. Moving on. Rattled, Emily woke up. Okay, so I guess it is a dream. Emily woke up, unable to remember what it was that had left her so alert and tense that going back to sleep was an impossibility. Probably, she'd been dreaming of what would happen the next night. The night she and Chris had reserved to have sex for the first time. Make love, she reminded herself, as if the euphemism might change it into something easier to accept. She squinted in the dark, trying to locate her sneakers. She dragged them out from beneath the desk and slipped her feet inside, leaving them untied. Then she pulled Chris's swimming sweatshirt over her nightgown and tiptoed downstairs and out of the house. It was warm for May, and the moon was high and swollen, ribboning the path between the hearts and the golds like a silver stream. Emily hurried, her arms flashing white as the thin limbs of the birches she passed. To her surprise, when she reached Chris's house, his bedroom light was still on. At 3 in the morning? On a Thursday night? She picked up a small stone and whipped it at his window, seeing his face appear almost instantly. The light winked back black, and suddenly Chris was standing a few feet away in a t-shirt and boxers, his fingers flexing on the frame of the side door. "I couldn't sleep," Emily said. "Me neither," Chris admitted with a smile. "Kept thinking about tomorrow and getting all worked up." Emily didn't say anything. Let him think that was what kept her awake too. She's let him think that was what kept her awake too. He came off the porch, barefoot, wincing at the gravel and twigs that cut into the soles of his feet as he approached Emily. "Come on," he said. "Might as well have some insomnia together." He pulled her along the edge of the Hart's lawn to the point where it ran into forest. The ground there was softer, pine needles still wet with winter, moss that grew in a ratty green fringe. Chris's step grew more sure as they headed into the woods, toward a massive granite slab. It had been years since they'd come there to play, with sticks for muskets and small cannonball boulders. Chris climbed onto the high, flat rock and helped Emily up. He curled his arm over her shoulders and looked back toward his house. "You remember when you pushed me off here and I had to get stitches?" Emily's hand went blindly to the spot on Chris's jaw. 17, she said dryly. "You still haven't forgiven me." "Oh, I've forgiven you," Chris assured her. "I just haven't forgotten." "Okay," she said, spreading her arms. "Push me off so we'll be even." Chris lunged, rolling Em onto her back as she laughed and kicked her heels against his shins. They tickled and squirmed the same way Emily remembered them doing as children, like puppies intent on catching each other's tails. Just making sure, like, the camera's not at a crazy angle or something. Okay. And then all of a sudden, Chris's hands stilled over her breasts, and his mouth hung over hers in the space of breath. "Say uncle," he whispered, and gently squeezed. "Unc," Emily said, and then his tongue filled her mouth, and his hands swept her from collarbone to hip, a completely different kind of game. She closed her eyes, listening to Chris's breathing and the throaty call of that owl. Just as quickly as it had begun, Chris levered himself off of her. He hauled Emily to a sitting position and chastely settled his arm around her. "I think," he said, "that's enough of that." Emily turned to him, mouth agape. "All of a sudden, you can wait?" In the dark, his teeth were very bright. "Now that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, I can," he said. He slid his arm down her waist. Emily shivered and tried to convince herself that it was from the cold. Emily shivered and tried to convince herself that it was from the cold. Next section. They lay on the wooden plank floor of the carousel, watching the stars spin through the tangle of carved tails and hooves. They were touching at the shoulders, the elbows, the hips, all spots that seemed to burn. Chris covered her hand with his own, and she nearly jumped out of her skin. He leaned up on an elbow. "What?" She shook her head, her throat painfully tight. "I can't just sit here and wait for it to happen," she said. "I want to get it over with." Chris's eyes widened. "It's not an execution, you know," he said. "Says you," Emily muttered. Chris laughed and sat up. "Well," he said, "what if we just talk for a little while and see what happens?" "Talk," Emily snorted, as if the very concept of that leading straight to sex was unthinkable. "What are we supposed to talk about?" "I don't know. How about the time we watched the dogs going at it?" Emily giggled. "I forgot about that," she said. "Mrs. Morton's poodle and the Springer Spaniel from Fieldcrest Lane." She felt Chris's fingers slip between her own, and speaking suddenly became a little easier. "I didn't think the poodle would be able to get on top of her." Chris smiled. Looked funny, didn't it? Then he laughed. "What?" "I was thinking fair is fair. We should find those dogs," he said, "and let them watch us." She thought of a long, stringy penis. I'm sorry. She thought of the long, stringy penis of the poodle. I just was not ready for this. I wasn't ready. Okay. Serious. All right. She thought of the long, stringy penis of the poodle sliding out of the bigger spaniel and slapping between its prancing legs. Whatever she and Chris were about to do couldn't be any more awkward than that. Chris's arm snaked over her shoulders. Better? Yeah, she admitted, turning her face into the hollow beneath his arm. He smelled of sweet deodorant, sweat, and excitement. How about, he said, tipping her face, I just kiss you. Just kiss, she said, for now. Don't think about the other. Emily smiled against his lips. Oh, right. Chris's mouth curved with hers. Humor me. He traced the line of her lips with his tongue, then trailed his kisses down her neck. She felt his hands shake as they came up beneath her shirt, and this made her feel better than anything else, the knowledge that Chris, too, was nervous. Then, in that way, time has during adolescence of going both far too quickly and entirely too slow, Emily realized her clothes were off. Her skin prickled with teeny goosebumps. She watched Chris roll a condom onto himself and was surprised that she found him beautiful, not strange or ugly. She let Chris come down on top of her, his chest burning against hers, his body neatly set between her legs. Do you think, she whispered, panicked, it will hurt? That stopped him. I don't know, he said. I think it's supposed to, a little. He rolled to Emily's side and stroked his hand over her hip, preoccupied. What's the matter? Emily asked. Nothing, he said, meeting her eyes. It's just that I forgot that part. I'm sure it's not too bad, Emily said. I don't think anyone's ever died of it. What am I doing? She thought wildly. Why am I urging him on? Chris smiled and brushed the hair off her forehead. If I could keep it from hurting you, I would, he said. I wish I was the one who'd feel it. Emily touched his forearm. That's very sweet, she said. It's not sweet, Chris said. It's selfish. I know that I can stand a little bit of pain, but I don't think I'll be able to watch yours. It's not sweet, Chris said. It's selfish. I know that I can stand a little bit of pain, but I don't think I'll be able to watch yours. Emily reached between his legs and wrapped her fingers around Chris. Hold up. I don't know what the struggle is today. I think it's just because it's the first time in a while. Emily reached between his legs and wrapped her fingers around Chris, making him gasp. He rolled onto her and shifted his weight to his elbows. If it hurts, he said, pinch me, so we're in it together. She felt him touching her, felt something wet that she realized came from herself, and then he was stretching her and stopping. She had a fleeting vision of the 1,000-piece puzzles they'd done as children. How Chris had a tendency to try to jam pieces in where they would never comfortably fit. Em, he said, sweat standing out on his brow. Do you want to do this? He would stop, she realized, if she shook her head. But she considered that what she wanted and what Chris wanted were inextricably tangled, and knew that he wanted this more than anything. At her slight nod, Chris pushed himself gently inside her. It hurt for a moment, and she dug her fingernails into his back. Then it wasn't so bad anymore. It felt odd, stretched from the inside out, but not painful. She felt her hips wobble as Chris began to push and moan faster and faster, scooting her back a few inches on the planks of the carousel floor. When he cried out, she was staring wide-eyed at the bare underbelly of a horse, aware for the first time that it had not been painted all over. Chris rolled off her, chest heaving. Oh God, he said, sprawled on his back. I think I'm dead. A moment later, he gathered her close. I love you, he whispered, touching his finger to her temples. But I made you cry. She shook her head, only realizing now that tears were still streaming. You made me? You made me. Her voice trailed off. And she left it like that. Okay, so now we're back to dreamland, I think. It's just a dare, she had told herself that day. And she'd pushed open the door of the men's bathroom in McDonald's. To her surprise, it was exactly like the ladies' room, except for the 2 urinals on the wall, and the fact that it was more smelly. There was someone in the other stall. Emily could see his legs, paralyzed by embarrassment. What if he noticed that her shoes were those of a 9-year-old girl? She stayed rooted in front of the sink, There was a flush, and then the door to the stall opened. The creep stood there, his clothes smelling of grease and disinfectant. "Well," he said, "what have we here?" Emily felt her legs trembling. "I must have gone in the wrong one," she stuttered. She whirled, heading for the door, but he grabbed her wrist. "Oh yeah," he said, his voice curling like smoke about her, pulling her closer. "How do you know it's the wrong one?" He pushed her up against the door, barring anyone else's entrance, holding her hands over her head. He slid his hand up her shirt. "No titties," he said. "Might be a man." Then he slipped his hand under the elastic of her shorts and rubbed his fingers between her clamped legs. "Don't feel no prick either, though," he said. He leaned forward so close that she could smell his breath. "Gotta make sure," he said, and jammed his fingers inside her. Panic was a shroud around her, stiffening her body and filling her mouth her mouth so that even though she screamed in her mind, no sound came from her throat. Just as quickly as the man had grabbed her, he let her go. Emily fell to the brown tile floor as he left, feeling the burn of disinfectant from his hands inside her. She was sick on the floor, then stood and rinsed her mouth. She straightened her clothing and walked back to the table where Chris was waiting for her. "Shh," Chris said, holding her against his chest. "You were screaming." She was still naked, and so was Chris, his erection stirring again against her hip. She shoved away from him, huddling into a ball. "I fell asleep," she said, her voice unsteady. "Oh," Chris said, smiling softly. "Sorry things got so boring." "It's not that," Emily explained. "I know. Just come here and sit with me." He held out his hand, unthreatening, and Emily crawled onto his lap, trying to believe it was perfectly okay to do this, although neither of them was wearing a stitch of clothing. She felt Chris's hands on her, laying her down against the cool wooden planks again. When she tried to roll away, he held her, and she whimpered. "I know you're sore," he said. "I just want to look at you. I was in a hurry before." He touched her breasts with his eyes, and then his fingers. He ran circles around her nipples and bit her collarbone. He let his hands pray their way down her belly, her hips, and then he parted her and stroked one finger over the folds. Trembling, she tried to kick him away, but he held her ankles. "No," he said, "just let me look at you." She felt his mouth make a damp mark on her navel, then slip downward. "You're perfect," he pronounced, and she blanched, knowing now that nothing could be farther from the truth. "Don't move," he said, his words vibrating between her legs. And by then she was sobbing. He immediately reared up, alarmed. "What's the matter? Did I hurt you?" She shook her head, sending tears flying. "I don't want to stay still. I don't want to stay still." She wrapped her arms around Chris and her legs without intending. And without intending, it felt him slip into her again, a tight and startling fit. "I love you," Chris mouthed, already past coherence. Emily turned her face away. "Don't," she answered. Okay, I'm trying to think how long we've been reading for. I think I'm going to stop there. Oh, God, that was intense. I think that was enough for one day. Yeah. So, let's see. I usually do a couple readings, and then I'll do the discussion video. That way we have lots to talk about. So, the next reading will be, I'm not sure when, because I literally just have a lot going on right now in my life. Like, a lot of things are changing. And so I don't have like a set schedule right now. Like, every day is different, kind of, right now. I'll get on a schedule, but anyways, all that to say, I'm not sure when I'll be, like, how often exactly I'll be posting, but I'll do my best to be regular on here, especially with the book club series, so that way we can keep going, because I don't want to leave you guys hanging, and I don't want to leave myself hanging. Like, this book is literally just picking up, like, now. So if you haven't started the book club series yet with me and you want to follow along, you can go through and watch all the videos that I've already made, or not watch, you can listen to them or watch them, whatever. I like to have stuff on in the background. Like, I listen to YouTubers in the background when I'm just like doing whatever, if I'm getting ready or cleaning or whatever. I just like that. Like, it just, I don't know what it is. It's comforting for me because, again, I guess I think of them as like, they're real people. You know what I mean? So like, I just think of them as like friends, and there's something about it that's comforting. So anyways, you can listen to all of them in a row if you want on my playlist. Or you can just jump in now. Like, you can just listen to this one and go from here if you want. It's totally up to you. But I like to know the full story, but you know, that's me. Anyways, I'm going to shut up now and say goodbye. I love you guys so much, and thank you for watching. Thanks for hanging out with me. I hope you enjoyed this story. Oh my God, I'm sorry. If you enjoyed this video or you enjoyed this story and you want to follow along, then subscribe. And I love you guys. Goodbye.
How y'all feel out there?
I'm light years, call me eons. When the snare kick in, the beat is neon. Lights, yeah, I'm feeling magnificent. Care less what I'm up against.